was really, really a tough pivot for me because I was so invested in this company that I bled for and laid my life down for to a certain extent. I fought for it for so many years. My name and who I was and the work that I'd done was so closely connected to that I felt like getting rid of it or letting go of it would just be heartbreaking. I had all these dreams and I had to kind of let go of those dreams and realize, okay, if I want to do this, which is different, then probably the fastest way is to work for somebody who already has that contract.
Welcome to The Practical Filmmaker, an educational podcast brought to you by the Filmmaker Institute and Sunscreen Film Festival, where industry professionals talk nuts and bolts and the steps they took to find their success today. On today's show, we talk with self-taught producer Bryan Fellows as he recounts his experience, software, and mistakes that got him producing national commercials for companies like T-Mobile, Nascar, and DoorDash. Find the full transcripts and more at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. I'm your host, Tanya Musgrave, and today we talk freelance producing with commercial producer Bryan Fellows, who has worked with companies such as T-Mobile, NASCAR, Chevrolet, DoorDash, and Nat Geo. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We actually got a chance to talk with you near the start of the pandemic, but it was with two other producers for our small companies during COVID episode. That was like episode 6. That was
That's
like
right.
at the very, very beginning of this podcast, like back when it was titled There to Hear. So the thing is, like when it's a group, we're never actually able to delve that deep. So this will be great. Let's start with how you got to where you are now.
How did I start? Well, early on, I got a really great opportunity due to some connections that family had to work at a television station really early. I mean, I'm talking like 15, 16 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
I had an internship and it allowed me to see, the inner workings of what would go on at a typical broadcast station. Now, this wasn't broadcast TV. This wasn't in quote unquote film or commercial filmmaking. It wasn't in any of those things. It was purely just broadcast. But it was cool because I was able to literally, sit behind directors and producers and audio engineers and all these different people and just watch what they did. And as a 15-year-old and even younger than that, I would just sit there and I would literally take notes. And it was great because, after they were done recording a segment or after, they were done recording a show, I would go up and, I was the annoying kid asking, why did you push that button? Why did that lever move a certain way?
Curiosity.
Yeah. And it was great too, because I've thought about this actually a lot now in my career and, and it's a different place and I'm doing different things, but, there are kids, college kids and younger that are coming up through the ranks and they're asking those questions and they're, curious, just like I was in a different way, because technology back then we were so separated, from technology, not like we are now. Now we can just jump on our phones and make a video, post on YouTube, make a TikTok, whatever it might be. None of that was accessible at the time. So, being able to be kind of a backseat or a fly in the wall, if you will, to that kind of work going on was super exciting and super interesting and not something that was tangible to most people. So that was an amazing opportunity. And that led to me essentially PAing, running cables, pushing road cases through event halls and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And one day during a show, there was a camera that was unmanned. And I saw the opportunity to jump on and try my hand at it. And I remember at the end of the show, the director was like, who ran that camera? Because he knew that, nobody was supposed to be on that camera. And then that led to being a camera operator. So it was kind of a slow journey, all within the broadcast realm. I knew early on that the more specialized I got, the more hireable I was. I had essentially a summer job, at this broadcast institution. And I would get called back every summer, which was awesome to, run camera and eventually run jib, which is more specialized and only a few people could do that. And so that was a cool thing. Played some video games, which, allowed me to get good at the joystick. And then I had my eye on directing. So I went to college with the hopes of doing this and, always had this, whatever this was, being in the film, being in the entertainment industry of some sort. My eye was on broadcast because that's all I knew at the time. Nothing else was tangible. Film seemed so far away. Of course, at that time, technology was starting to shift, and a lot of people share a similar story to me, just, due to my age group, the accessibility of cameras that were deemed film, even though they're in the digital realm, started becoming accessible. I mean, the Red 1 came out, which was a huge transformational thing.
Mm.
the 5D Mark II in a simpler way, but
Hmm.
a more tangible, way.
Accessible too. Yeah.
Yeah, and accessible, exactly. And to shoot in a way that was more cinematic than we'd ever been able to do in the past,
Hmm.
at least at that level. That was super exciting. And so at that time, again, I was still in the broadcast realm. I had my eye on directing. I was in college. It wasn't going great. I wasn't super interested in what I was doing. And I was kind of hopping around a little bit between majors, not really landing because the digital multimedia or fine arts degree that I was going for really wasn't teaching me the things that I wanted to learn. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to that. So I'd been, doing that summer job, essentially working in broadcast, and the same organization reached out and said, hey, we're starting a new station. It's in, the Latin realm. It's going to be all Latin programming. Uh, we're looking for directors. We knew you had an eye on that. I had done some, training, obviously, with some directors, before then, and kind of knew the ropes generally, but really didn't have an opportunity. There wasn't an opportunity for me. And so they said, are you interested in that? We know you're in college. I said, well, forget this. I'll do that instead.
Hmm.
So I completely ditched college. I think I was 3 years in. I honestly, at this point, it's so far past me that I don't remember how many years
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
college I did. Not even anywhere near a general degree, oddly enough, because I kind of hopped around too much. I kind of had my hand in a few different pots.
Mm.
So I left to do that. It was awesome. It was
Nice.
awesome. I was a freelancer. I got brought in a lot though for different projects and, wasn't getting paid extremely well, but it was exciting for me,
Hmm.
and it
And it
was
was
kind of the
experience.
launch point. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was the
Yeah.
launch point. But as I said, the technology was changing. And even though I was doing so many cool things and it kind of made up for, the financial aspect, I was getting to travel, I was getting to go to different countries, as I
Hmm.
mentioned, it was a Hispanic network. And so there was a lot of Hispanic speaking networks. So there was a lot of countries that I was able to go to, Mexico, and I was able to go to Puerto Rico and Colombia and all these different
Hmm.
places. And it was really fun, but I really had this desire. I think I always did, to start my own outfit. I have my own production company of some sort.
Hmm.
I got my hands on, I think it was a T2i, a Canon T2i at the time, and then a
Yeah.
5D Mark II, and
Yeah.
kind of working my way up that line.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I can create some videos with that.
Hmm.
And so I started my own company, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I
Hmm.
kind of figured out the process to do that legally. And I created the company.
Legally.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
whole new ball game. I didn't know what I was doing. It was a partnership early on. I created with a few other friends of mine from college.
Hmm.
And we sought out to change the world and do amazing things. It was maybe a year or so into it where we were struggling, kind of, using the resources and the connections that we had, from other previous, work experience, which wasn't much, college connections, et cetera. We were trying to make it. Some of those guys were in college still while
Hmm.
we were trying to do this. We could kind of clearly see that each of us was going a different direction.
Hmm.
And so slowly, the different members of this collective started disbanding. I decided to keep the company and to keep moving forward. It led to so many different opportunities. I did a lot of smaller corporate projects and,
Hmm.
local projects and those kinds of things. I have a religious background. And so a lot of the projects that I was involved in had some sort of connection to a church or a religious organization or
Hmm.
even a nonprofit of some sort.
Hmm.
So there were smaller projects, but there were such great opportunities for me because it allowed me to play in this realm where I didn't know what I was doing, but the stakes weren't super high.
Yeah, no, you have like low stakes. You have a lot of
Yeah,
opportunity with a higher role, with a more in
absolutely.
control role. So, like, yeah, it's actually a really
Absolutely.
advantageous place to be.
It was a training ground. It was kind of college, if you will, for me. And I made a ton of mistakes. I
Mm.
mean, missed deadlines, didn't follow through. I mean,
Yeah.
across the board, didn't know what I was doing financially. I mean, just all kinds of stuff, trying
Yeah.
to make it. And it was great. And I actually am glad that I made those mistakes and in the realm that I did, even though, at the time, I look back at it now as low stakes. At the time, they were high stakes for me because this is
Hmm.
literally all I had.
Yeah.
This is how I was paying
Yeah.
my rent. It was
Hmm.
how I was feeding myself. Most of the meals were pasta, ramen noodles, but it was still keeping me alive. But I look back at it now and I think, that was great that I made those mistakes though, because even though it took time and there were a few times where I was making the same mistakes over and over, I started to learn from them.
Yeah.
And I surrounded myself with some great people. I mean, some awesome partners early on, people who I knew from college and from other places along the way, people I'd meet along the way, different
Mm-hmm.
projects that I would bring on board as freelancers and kind of partners in crime, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I made some great friends. I mean, we worked together.
Yep, yep, yep. That is where I met you. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember a long plane ride to Hawaii where I think I talked your ear off the entire time, and you were like, "I just want to sleep." So
Well, I
we
was
had
trying
some.
to figure out. I was trying to figure out who is this
Who
guy.
is
Like, well,
this?
who is this
Yeah,
guy? Because I've got to work with him for the next 2 weeks. So,
absolutely,
but
absolutely. We had a lot of
yeah.
fun. I mean,
Oh
we kind of
yeah, a
traversed
blast.
around Hawaii together, and then a lot of other projects ensued after that.
Yeah.
But it was that. It was
Mm-hmm.
meeting people along the way, which a lot of those people have become very, very dear friends of mine who continue to this day, even though we've kind of gone down our different paths. And I learned so much. I mean, I remember still kind of being in the event space, doing other things too, but still being in the event space because that was closer to broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
I remember,
Yeah.
getting myself into projects that I probably didn't have any business doing or I didn't even have the skill or, it didn't know all the gear that we were, trying to use. I mean, I remember literally selling projects before we even knew myself and the team members that I brought on board even knew how to do that thing that we were selling ourselves that, we were experts on. And yeah, it's kind of stupid, right? But at the same time, I knew that even though we didn't know how to do those things necessarily, maybe halfway
Mm.
or sometimes not at all, we figure it out. And the
Mm-hmm.
best
Yeah.
fire under yourself is the pressure of, oh crap, I've got to do this.
Yeah.
I
Oh
have to
yeah.
literally, deliver in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it didn't quite work, but most of the
I want
time
to
it
know a
did.
story. I want to know a story of when it didn't.
There's so many. I remember being on site, doing projects where, like in particular, one time we sold this whole idea where we're gonna bring in an LED wall, and it was gonna be this whole production, and we didn't know anything about LED walls, and so we bid out, we won, the bid on it. We had a number quoted, and I remember myself and one of the guys I was working with at the time, we literally flew to China. We bought an LED wall in 5 hours, turned around, flew back to the United States,
My
and we're like,
gosh.
oh man, this is the largest purchase we've ever made, and I think we have the money to cover this. And we also don't know what we're doing. We checked the box on the order form that was the shipping route, literally via ship versus flying it because the
Yeah.
cost was lower, and
Yeah.
we were trying to save money. So we cut it real close because literally the day that we were supposed to truck this gear to the event was the day that the ship landed.
Ugh.
And so we picked up the gear, never have tested this ever, brought it on site, and we figured it out on the fly. And it did work, and it did, come together. There were a few frantics like Skype calls or something with our Chinese counterparts in,
Word.
that had made this thing. But
That's
I mean,
insane.
so many stories, right?
No,
So
but I
many
want to know when
crazy
it
things.
didn't work, Brian. When did the when did the wall
When did it
didn't
not work?
not the wall, but like when did it not
Yeah.
work out? One of those risks.
Well, I'm racking my brain trying to think about moments where it didn't work because a lot of times we pulled it off
Yeah.
somehow. This isn't really the same, but
Yeah.
I can remember a time where I didn't deliver,
Mm.
and it was bad. I mean, I
Mm.
literally had to pay money back because I didn't
Mm.
deliver a product,
Mm-hmm.
and that hurt because I didn't
Yeah.
have that money,
Mm.
especially as a small business owner, and you know
Mm.
I wasn't trained in business. I'm just
Mm.
figuring this out on the fly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And learning
Yeah.
as I went. And when I didn't deliver and I had to pay back the money
Mm-hmm.
that was paid to me, when you're a small business, you kind of, borrow to pay the next thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's that motion where, you use one project to pay for the next, and then that
Mm.
next project pays the next thing.
Yep.
And that was rough. I remember it was really, really rough. And I had to scrounge to make that work. And, those are the lessons, the lessons of not backing things up. I mean, I remember there was a lightning strike once in the middle of file transfer between hard drives, and we lost like everything we'd filmed that day. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many of those things,
Yeah.
having to go back to the client and say, we don't have this. And
Mm-hmm.
we were not smart enough to, back it up multiple times. Yeah. There's so many different stories. And so slowly along the way, I started learning these things and kind of gaining the experience that has really led me to where I am today. And there was some pivots along the way because I'm definitely doing something different than I was doing before.
Tell me about that pivot point, because I know that like
Yeah.
from these particular projects where we work together, you
Yeah.
know, much smaller, much more the indie, I guess,
Yeah.
compared
Yeah.
to, you know, like national commercials and
Sure.
that kind of a thing. The show that we were working on ended,
Mhm.
and then, you know, you went your way and I went mine. And I like the next thing I know that you're like, oh, hey, you know, I'm working on this big thing. I'm like, how did he get over there? Like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
happened? So,
Well, that's a good question. And I remember there was a veggie grill incident, a conversation that happened at Veggie Grill, and I'll get to that in a second, that you and I had actually.
oh, yeah,
Yes,
I
that was
remember this.
actually a very pivotal conversation. So thank you for that conversation because it helped me.
What
But
did I
yes,
say?
it was all veggie grill. We had good food. It
Yeah.
was the inspiration that we needed. No, I mean, like I was saying a second ago,
Yeah.
all these different projects, it was teaching me something in the background that maybe I wasn't cognizant of at the
Mm,
time, but I was slowly learning processes and how to do certain things.
mm,
Had a really incredible opportunity, and you were part of this for a number of years to travel extensively
mhm.
internationally
Yeah.
and do a lot of projects for essentially NGOs, people
Mhm.
who were in the healthcare, realm, and there was a religious element to some of that, and to follow stories in the field.
Mm,
And the filmmaking side of it, obviously, I was learning a lot because this was a very structured process. We were delivering, 30-minute episodes over the course of multiple seasons.
mhm,
And I'd never done that before. So this was
mhm.
all new, and trying to create that process, and one that would work. And it
Yeah.
was rough at the very beginning, trying to get that process to be fluid. I take this from a friend of mine from college who kind of instilled this in me. And I had to do a little trial and error too before I was able to really realize how important this was. But he always said, your time is more valuable, and you can't do everything at once. Can't do everything yourself. And so your time is more valuable. So using the analogy of somebody who needs to mow their lawn, he's like, well, you can mow your lawn and, you can waste the 2 or 3 hours, right? Or you can pay the kid down the street $20 to mow your lawn. And now you have those hours back. And
Yeah.
since your time is more valuable because you can make more money and do more things from a business perspective during that time, it would be better to use, that $20 to pay the kid versus spending the 2 or 3 hours. And
Mm,
there's pros and cons on both sides, right?
mhm.
But I realized early on that friends, people, coworkers around me who are excellent at what they do would free me up to do what I did best. And even though I could kind of do everything to a certain degree, I
Mhm.
can kind of run audio or can kind of edit.
Mhm.
I'm never as good as somebody who is just an editor or just a
Yeah.
sound mixer or just a DP or what have you. And it was hard to let go because I enjoyed all those things, right? But as I kind of started to slowly let go of some of those things, and you can't do that fully as a small business because
Mhm.
you do wear all those hats
Yeah.
to a certain degree.
Yeah.
The more I let go, the better it would get, the product.
Mhm.
And over the course of the show, I started realizing that. It used to be that I would edit it, I would shoot it, I directed it, I produced it. And then we had people who were facilitating, some of that as well. But I was
Yeah.
also involved in all those pieces. But the more I let go and let an editor take care of the editing, then I would just manage, and et
Mhm.
cetera, all these different pieces. Then it started to flow better because I really couldn't do it all myself. That show ended, and I kind of was at this pivotal point of what do I do next, first of all,
Mhm.
because I've learned so much when it comes to the craft itself at that level. I've also had a lifetime of education from purely the fact that I've traveled around the world,
Mhm.
multiple times over, and seen so much and talked to so many different people and learned from so many different cultures, and an experience that, I'll never forget because it was pivotal for me. And I gained so much just from that,
Mhm.
purely. What do I do? And I really wanted to jump to that next level, get to the next rung on the ladder.
Mhm.
And so we sat down at Veggie Grill, and I remember asking you, like, what am I? Because I don't really know from a title position, whatever, because I wore so many hats, for all these years, starting broadcast, now kind of in this corporate, indie, whatever you want to call it, realm, kind of this smaller tier production realm. What am I best at? And I remember us narrowing it down, and I think you said you're a line producer. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, because at the time, the very specific roles weren't identified, because we were all kind of doing everything in that phase of life and phase of my career. But I started thinking, if I could get into commercials, that would be really cool. And I'd really love to work on a Nike commercial, or something of that level, a Coca-Cola commercial.
Right.
But I don't know if they would ever call my little company of me. How is that even possible?
Right.
And it was really, really a tough pivot for me, because I was so invested in this company that I'd kind of, bled for and laid my life down for, to a certain extent, and I fought for it for so many years to make it. And I felt very attached. My name and who I was and the work that I'd done was so closely connected to that I felt like getting rid of it or letting go of it would just be heartbreaking. So it's really hard to let go of the idea of this production company. And, I wanted to get to the point where I would have this staff and this, this office and all these things. I had all these dreams, and I had to kind of let go of those dreams and realize, okay, if I want to do this, which is different, then probably the fastest way is to work for somebody who already has that contract. But I didn't want to go full time anywhere. I didn't fully know what line producing was. And so I knew that I had probably 75%, maybe 80% of the knowledge it would take to produce at that level. And saying the word producer reminds me of the fact that I realized that when it's all said and done, even though I love gear and I can talk shop, all day with those that play with gear all day, I enjoy, the ins and outs of all these different facets of production. Really, what I'm best at is, first of all, talking to people, because I've already talked your ear off today. And I love coordination. And so, it seemed to fall under producing, that was really where my talents, lay.
Yeah. I'd have to add to that too,
because
please. I remember, now that you're talking about Veggie Girl, I do remember one thing that I did pick out, and that was just that you take care of your people.
You did say that. I remember.
I remember being in the Philly airport. Yep. I remember being in the Philly airport. My flight had gotten canceled. There was a line 2 miles long. It was snowed in. I knew that I had to get on this flight to, I think maybe Ohio. I don't even remember where I was, but I remember you being international. Like, you were already eyeballs deep in another project. And I remember I was just like, oh man, there's no way. Because, once you get production brain, you're deep into a project, like, it is very hard to split your brain and manage something else that's part of a different project, and like anything regarding logistics. It's just like, okay, I got to do this first. like, nuts to you, but like, I got to do this first. But I remember specifically in the Philly airport, I was just like, it's okay. I'll just pop a squat over in that corner, because you're in your 20s and it doesn't matter, and your back doesn't hurt, and you can actually stay a full night on an airport floor and be sort of fine the next day, right? And you're just like, absolutely not. 1 second. And you came back and you're just like, go to this hotel, get your rest. You will be much better for me if you are able to sleep, take a shower, and let me get your flight worked out. And everything was worked out. And I was just like, oh my gosh, okay. Like, this is okay. All right. I felt much better about going off and doing that job, because number one, I knew that I was going to be able to sleep, but it was also very nice knowing that I had somebody looking out for me. But in any case, so I remember talking about that now.
I do remember that. I remember that instance very well. And this is the thing I didn't realize. I mean, since I was 5 years old, playing with my Legos, I've always wanted to be in this industry in some way, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it meant.
Yeah.
This is what I was meant to do, and I always wanted to do. But it's taken me quite a while to figure out that producing was really what it was. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
DPing or directing or,
Mm.
you name it. I mean, there was so many different roles that I really enjoyed. And I thought, because I had so much interest in the gear side of things,
Mm-hmm.
that that's where I was ending up. But at the end of the day, throughout all of this that I've mentioned, the through line is that I like putting it together.
Mm-hmm.
I like putting all the pieces together,
Yeah.
picking the people, bringing the right team,
Mm-hmm.
for this specific project, a team that would fit that project.
Mm-hmm.
I like gathering, all the rental orders and all that stuff. I like the logistics of the hotels and the flights and all
Mm-hmm.
those, pieces of the puzzle. And so, yeah, producing was what it was. Yeah, it took a while. It wasn't overnight, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
jumping to the commercial realm.
Mm-hmm.
But as I have done multiple times in my career, I got in deeper than I should have early on. But it was exactly the way that at least I work best, is getting myself so deep that I have to figure it out. I
Mm-hmm.
have the pressure on me now of I have to either win or I
Mm-hmm.
completely fail and it's going to be really bad.
Okay.
But I think all these years of working on smaller projects, working for, religious projects, for example, all these different projects that I'd done, that now looking back, the stakes were not as high as they are now. It gave me so much training. And then the last, 20, 30%, I figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest parts of that is budgeting, because
Mm-hmm.
I was the guy that failed math so many times that I was in remedial math in college because I never passed the entry level math exam. And so
I
they
hate
wouldn't put
math.
me into math class. Yeah,
Hate it.
exactly.
Ugh.
I'm a creative, right? I don't do math. And here I am. I spend half my days, working out budgets, Excel, and what have you. But yeah, it's so crazy. Age also helps. And I know that's weird, but it really
Mm.
does. I think the older you get, the more honed in on, what you want, what you care about, and the stakes matter
Yeah.
more. And now I care about learning, and I care about, getting better at this specific honed in craft that I've settled on.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me
Yeah.
about like what the actual, I mean, I know that it doesn't happen overnight, but
Mm-hmm.
you had mentioned getting onto a set with
Mm-hmm.
somebody who had already had the bid. Let's split that hair. How did you get
Sure.
that gig?
I'm trying to remember what the first one was. And I
Mm.
honestly cannot remember off the top of my head right now what the first one was. But I use the biggest superpower that I have, and that's I can make friends with a rock. So I got to know people,
Okay.
and it took a lot of time. And some of those relationships were right away.
Hmm.
And then some of those relationships, it took time for it to pay off. I do remember, actually, I did a small project. A guy who I'd met, he said, "Hey, instead of meeting me at my office, why don't you come down and meet at this co-working space?" I said, "Okay, cool." So I went down, and instead of going to his office, I went there to the co-working space, and he introduced me to some people. And these were people outside of my circle. I didn't
Hmm.
know these people at all. And they
Yeah.
were at the beginnings of getting into the commercial realm.
Hmm.
And it was massively, massively helpful for me, because I became very good friends with a few, and a few that I met there. And to this day, have been constant collaborators. But I started learning the world of
Hmm.
commercial filmmaking
Yeah.
through them,
Yeah.
not only getting to meet some key players, but also I started getting into, groups online. I mean, literally,
Hmm.
there are Facebook groups online that are full of directors and producers and DPs
Name a
and
few.
varied. Yeah, there is a group called Wherespot on
Hmm.
Facebook.
Hmm.
There is a group called Video Village on Facebook. There's a few,
Hmm.
and these are all invite only,
Hmm.
but once you get into some of these groups, you start seeing, oh, this person's commenting multiple times, and this person is, and
Hmm.
they seem to be doing this thing. And you start kind of putting the pieces together.
Hmm.
And in the commercial world, it's not as big as people think, as most worlds are, right? I mean, I'm sure
Hmm.
the narrative world is that way as well, though I'm not as tapped into that. And so it's cool. I started meeting people. I would go to conventions or meetups.
Hmm.
I know, like, there was a meetup at NAB. There
Hmm.
was a Cinegear hadn't been a thing, and it didn't exist before, but it started. And, that was another way to connect with other filmmakers in different places. And it was just putting yourself out there saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is what I do. I do this one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing what happened. And
Nice.
slowly I would get called and would be brought on,
Producer or something
projects.
else?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually got in as a producer and kind of
Nice.
sold myself that way. I luckily had, in theory, years of experience doing producing, even though it was at a very much a smaller level than, where I was trying to head. A lot of those skills paid off. And,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, the rest I learned on the job, and I made some mistakes, but I learned on the job. And there were a couple key people that I can, think of. Seth Haley was one of them. He was the one that first person I met at that co-working space. There was another guy whom I met. His name was Chris Fenner down in Atlanta. I took a chance on a job that I knew that he was going to be part of as the VP. It was a job I did for free,
Mm-hmm.
purely because I knew that I was going to meet him and
Mm-hmm.
that there may be some connection there. And I
Yeah.
hoped for the best.
Yeah.
And I kept doing that, meeting different people who, I would take a chance. And even if it was lower pay or what have you, it was the chance to work on something that maybe would lead me to the next thing.
Yeah.
And in turn, those people and others took chances on me.
Yeah.
Chris was the one that brought me into doing branded content for NASCAR.
Nice.
And, I never would have even had a chance probably at that point, but he saw something in me and a very small project that we did together, and, was being brought on as a director for some of this branded content, and said, well, I'm going to bring this producer in. And I learned, and kind of BS my way through and learned on the way, and just kept going from there.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's talk about some of that learning on the job.
Sure.
What's an example of something that you learned that you had done weirdly at first? Like, for instance, budgeting, all of those things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't know that there were standards for some of this stuff. There are standards for all of it, but when you are in the indie world, you kind of make it up as you go and fly by the seat of your pants, and it sort of works, right? And that's how I approached it. And it's kind of funny. I remember some of the early agency jobs that I did. I had budgeted a certain way. It was this kind of convoluted Google Sheets, somewhat Excel looking, thing that I'd created, and it worked for me. All calculated right, and that was great, but it was very convoluted, and it made sense from my head, but it didn't make sense to anybody else. And what was interesting is I didn't realize that there were standards early on, and nobody called me out on it, so I just kind of kept going.
Okay.
But I learned, I never worked with crews more than 5 to 10 people, maybe, if that. And they were all friends of mine for the most part in the early days. And so we kind of figured out what pay was going to be and went from there. And I made mistakes there too, but it was interesting learning, well, what does a gaffer get paid? What does a key grip get paid? Sound mixers, et cetera. Oh, and there's kit fees. Well, I didn't know that, what a kit. And I had to learn all this. And I kind of just, and in conversation, would start picking those, tidbits up from people, start learning those processes. And some of that was kind of shared to me through some of these newer connections I'd made that were guiding me through some of it. So I built out this budgeting program, I guess you'd call it, or template on Google Sheets. And it served me well for a couple of years until I started realizing that in the commercial realm, well, there's AICP, and AICP has a certain way to bid. And, there are different budgetary softwares out there that you can have access to. As archaic and frustrating as they are, and luckily there are some new alternatives that are on the horizon there. Then I started playing with that, and I didn't know how to use any of those programs. Nobody had taught me.
What are some of those programs that you came across?
Yeah, like Hot Budget was one of them. Oh, there's Movie Magic. I mean, there's multiple different standard programs that everybody uses, and somebody at some point in history created these things, probably decades ago. And I don't think they've been really updated since. And so it's extremely buggy, and they'll crash your program, your Excel program, or however it's built. And it's very frustrating, but they do the job, and they do it in a way that is standardized, so that when you're submitting, a PDF budget to an agency or production company, everybody knows what that means. Everybody knows how it's supposed to be laid out. And there's a kind of a consensus among everybody that this is how it's supposed to be. And it was, now so great to have all that knowledge. And now I can work on projects that I probably never would have been able to early on, even early on in my commercial, career, because if I had gotten these opportunities, I would have been laughed out of the room. I probably would have been let go
Yeah.
pretty quick because they would have realized I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So I'm glad that the process was somewhat gradual
Yeah.
and that nobody fact checked me early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had mentioned a couple of new options that might be on the horizon. What are you seeing?
A producer and good buddy of mine, Jens Jacob, he's from Cypher Films. He's created new software. He's an entrepreneur at heart. He's a fantastic producer and done some really great things with some awesome filmmakers that some of you probably know. But he, in his entrepreneurial side, has always had multiple other businesses and ventures, going on, and one of them has been, in the budget making software making realm for filmmakers, because he realized in the same way that I have that this is so outdated, and so many people, I think producers that are our age
Mm.
versus maybe those that have been around for, 30 or 40 years and just are so used to it that they wouldn't change necessarily. We're of the age of technology and, building computers and, all those things. And so when it's not sleek and updated and fast, responsive, connected to all the things, it doesn't make sense to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure for those that are coming up, through the ranks as well. And so he started a budgetary software called Green Budget
Mm.
that is in its infancy, going through beta stages currently, but really just light years ahead of what's out there, based on the same principles, on the same structures for not only commercial filmmaking but also narrative and otherwise. And there's other software out there too that has nothing to do with budgeting, but that I use that's maybe a little more up to date, that has helped me in other ways producing as well.
Gotcha. So, one of the things that you had mentioned a while ago, you had talked about like delivering. And I did have a question on turnaround expectations, because you were involved with like different types of projects as the producer.
Yeah,
So, a lot of the time, those turnaround times were kind of up to you, not up to
yeah,
you, but like you were heading
they
those
were
up. So,
looser.
yeah. So, like, what are the turnaround expectations for commercials versus some of the other projects that you did?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Typically, we get anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. Usually, 2 weeks is about standard lead time
Okay.
to put a commercial together. My role from the get go, and it depends on the production company or agency that I'm working for.
Mm-hmm.
Every agency is a little bit different. Every production company is a little bit different the way they handle it. The ultimate route for me and the way I like to work is, and this all goes back to relationships,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
The closer I am with the leads in these
Mm-hmm.
different places will change how I'm brought into a project. But my favorite is if I'm brought in early enough that it's
Mm-hmm.
actually in the bidding phase, and then I'm
Okay.
actually
Yeah.
brought in a week or 2 weeks prior
Mm-hmm.
to that 2 week mark. And the reason I like that is, first of all, I'm already getting my head around the project versus being kind of thrown it and saying, you have
Yeah.
2 weeks,
Yeah.
So that's nice, even if I'm not moving forward on any of the processes or the logistics of making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, and this is the bigger part of it, is I get to be a voice in the budget phase, in the
Mm-hmm.
bid phase.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always going to take that bid that I get, a final bid that's greenlit, and then turn it into a budget.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm brought into the bid phase, I can speak into not only errors, because
Mm-hmm.
that happens on the agency side. They're not in the trenches like I am. And so depending on the logistics, depending on where this is being filmed, there's so many different variables that go into
Mm-hmm.
it. But based on those specific variables, I can quickly say, oh, wait, no, you need to budget more for this, or this should be shifted, or, this shoot really needs to be 2 days. And so you need to budget appropriately, or whatever
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
speaking into those things drastically helps, because then it doesn't screw me over later.
Yeah.
Because once I'm on board as a producer and it's actually greenlit, we're moving forward, I get handed something that is either going to be rough and I'm going to have to somehow figure out a way to make this happen, or if I've been able to speak into it, it's set up for me that I
Mm-hmm.
can, do it in a way that's going to be appropriate. It's not going to be as much of a hassle to negotiate with vendors or,
Mm-hmm.
make happen in general. So
Yeah. So, how do you quote for a job that comes your way?
it You mean bid on a job or quote my
Yeah,
own time?
both actually. Yeah, let's go for
So
both.
yeah, so bidding on a job, a commercial job, it's really it's such an ambiguous answer, and it's the answer that I would hate if I was on the other end of this, but it comes with experience.
Yep.
When you understand the rules that go into making, a project like this,
Yep.
you understand how the variables of this specific project that you're working on, how they will play out in a day on set or even post, though I'm not as involved in post typically on most of these projects. Once you have your head around that, you can start making pretty educated guesses
Mm-hmm.
on what it's going to take, and always buffering. Something I like to do on the budgeting side is I like to put money in places I can forget later, because it always helped me. And on top of that, I always have contingency and so forth baked in, but I like buffering either
Mm-hmm.
rates to be just a tad higher than they should be, kind of padding it,
Mm-hmm.
or sticking money in line items that I'm never going to use for that project,
Mm.
because sometimes I forget about it. And then when I'm going through and the fine tooth comb and I'm like, oh man, I need an extra $500. Where am I going to find that? That I find it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I put that there, for a reason, and
Yeah.
that's great. And I can steal that money for later. So it's hard to give you, oh, you need to do this, 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 and this. I mean, it's unless you're able to look over my shoulder and watch me do what I do, I can't really give you like an exact answer. But
No
I will
worries.
say that it comes to experience. The years of doing what I have done,
Mm-hmm.
I've been able to get to understand, generally speaking, these different roles and what it takes to accomplish those roles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been so beneficial, because there are producers out there that are amazing at what they do, but they're just business people.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have that background. They haven't, worked as PAs or haven't
Mm-hmm.
worked as, camera ops or what have you. And they don't have some of even the technical knowledge. If I'm working on quotes with vendors, rental companies, et cetera, I can spot errors, or I can spot things where I'm like, you don't really need this.
Mm-hmm.
It could work better this way. And
Mm-hmm.
I can talk shop with gaffers and DP, whereas, some of my counterparts can't. So I count that as a benefit.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
the flip side of your question, how do I budget, or how do I quote for my time?
Yeah.
It really depends on the job. And again, it kind of goes back to that ambiguous answer if it comes with experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I now am at a point where I know how long a certain job is going to take, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And you also get to know who you're talking to, the agency, the production company, et cetera, and how they're going to react to certain numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Some will be totally cool with, this is my day rate, and even if I work 20 days, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, I know that that's not going to fly with an agency. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they don't have that much overhead, or that specific job, they, low bid it. And so they don't have that leeway.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is all helpful to have the knowledge of the bid early on. And then it sometimes becomes a project rate versus a day rate, because at a certain point, it would be ridiculous to pay me for, 40 days of work or whatever it might be. I'm just throwing a random number out there.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a day rate, or rather a project rate, a project rate. And it's always, I say that project rate is always based on a day rate, but it at some level, it kind of becomes just a number that's going to work. It's going to work for them. It's going to work for me. And I know that that's going to be, acceptable. It also comes down to, here's another factor, just a personal factor, comes down to how much that I need to live on.
Yeah.
And how much I have projected in a certain year that I want to make. And then know that that means X amount of projects at a certain rate, and a project rate that's going to equal up to that sum,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that is helpful. There have been times where it's actually been more lucrative to take on jobs where, from a project rate standpoint, it's over, let's say, a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I make more. I should say every time probably I would make more if it was my day rate every single day throughout the course of a campaign or a commercial, right? Mm-hmm. It would always be that way. But there is a security, though, that sometimes you have to take advantage of. For example, I'll take this year as an example here. This year, I knew that I had 2 campaigns, 2 big projects I was going to work on. And even though I probably would make a little bit less doing it that way, bidding myself or quoting myself for that full campaign as one chunk, instead of it being, per day, or it's just going to be this commercial and then it's going to be the second commercial in the campaign, it's going to be the third commercial, et cetera. There is a security in knowing that over the course of these months, I've got work and I have money and it's and a consistent paycheck coming in.
Yep.
And so I kind of go back and forth with clients where some parts of the year, sometimes I'm doing that, where I'm filling in the gaps the rest of the year with just freelance producing, where every job is its own thing. Sometimes I can stack jobs, I can do multiple jobs at the same time. It all helps to equate to that end goal of what you're trying to, achieve. Every few years, I'm trying to ratchet that up. Let me see if I can achieve to a different level, and get there. And you don't always every year, but sometimes it works out, and it's setting goals for yourself. And it also helps me determine which projects I'm going to take, because there is that financial goal along with creative goals and other goals that I might have can balance out.
Gotcha. So now we're going to talk about some tools of your trade. I know that you had actually mentioned some of the software that you use. What gear or gadget, though, or resource or software is an old reliable?
There's a couple of the tools. A Set Hero is one that's really great. It's actually another friend of mine developed that software. It makes call sheets and a few other pieces of data for your time on set. It's geared a little bit more toward narrative, but it's a fantastic tool. It'll send out your call sheets in a really effective way. There's Studio Binder. That's a similar product that's out there. It's a little more broad. And so it allows me to do what I do on the commercial side a little bit better than Set Hero does, but it's a great product. It'll text out call sheets and email out call sheets at the same time, which is really neat. And, I can track on there, who's opened the call sheet and viewed it, who's not.
Knowing who to hound.
Yeah, so those are really, really neat pieces of software. And there's other things that it'll do too for scripting, et cetera. And both sets of software will do that. Frame.io, it's kind of the standard now for engaging in the back and forth when it comes to editing.
Yep.
And, gaining feedback from clients, getting feedback from all the parties involved in the post-production side of things, whether it's the editor, your sound mixers, the people who are doing your score, just, MoGraph, you name it. Anybody who's, color, anybody who's involved in the post-production side, it's so invaluable. It's the best way to share, clips with different people, share it to clients. It's just amazing. So huge supporter for MIO. And it's so integrated in both Final Cut X as well as Premiere and I believe the DaVinci as well. And then I also, I still have my company throughout all this time, even though I work as essentially just me as a producer. And then I also have my production coordinator who works for me now, who has been the greatest asset in the last several years to not only being able to keep me on track, but also kind of goes back to what I said way back at the beginning of our call, how my good friend said, well, stick in your lane, let some of the other people do the other things. She's amazing at details that I'm not. And, does a lot of the paperwork and the very fine-tuned logistics. And what's really awesome at working with her is, on some of these bigger productions that we're working on, there's just no way. I mean, I would be buried from, 5 a.m. in the morning till midnight every night. One of the first things that I told her when I first hired her, as I said, I want to be able to go to bed at night and to spend time with my wife. I want to be able to not work on the weekends, and she has been invaluable to making that happen. So since I spend most of my time on Zoom, meeting with clients and dealing with the back and forth of agencies, et cetera. So with my company, sometimes agency or production company doesn't want to deal with the headache of the paperwork and payroll and all of that goes into it, even though most of the time they have a system in place. And so I have a payroll company that I use called Wrapbook. And they're kind of new to the game and have been awesome. Very, very streamlined, modern, all the things that you'd want in this day and age. And so, they've been invaluable to what I do as well, to keep all the finances in order, as well as QuickBooks and some of these other, very standard, business software.
Nice. I mean, some of these I feel like counted for the next thing, which was your favorite new gadget or software that revolutionized the way that you work. I don't know if you can think of any others, but I
mentioned Zoom a second ago. And I mean, we all now know what Zoom is, especially the pandemic has really made us remote.
Yep.
And I work half the time at home, half the time from my office. Zoom has become very invaluable to quickly being able to meet with clients, meet with, do casting, even though I will say, being, somebody who has casted in person in the room and casted via Zoom, I do really miss casting sessions. There's just something that's just not the same, but it is nice that, it's quick and easy and I can do it, in my house. But Slack has been really awesome. And then a lot of my partners in the Chicago area at being kind of my home area that I work in, though I do a lot of, work across the country and even internationally still, I would say probably it leans more toward work that I do locally. And so, I always use the same people for, locations. And now that COVID is something we have to worry about, there are, COVID testing protocols and so forth that are in place. So a lot of these vendors, that I work with all the time, I've got them integrated in Slack as well. And so it's so easy for either myself or my production coordinator to be able to easily, send them a message and kind of do away with half of the emails because there's so many emails that we have to deal with already. And so that's a nice way for us to communicate and connect.
And the question that I wrap up every single episode with, what question should I have asked you?
Whoever, you are that's listening to this, if you're a student specifically, it's tough in a conversation like this to give like the nuts and bolts in a really tangible way, but I'll give you a quick 30-second snapshot of what, my production coordinator and I do. We go through an intake, a questionnaire that we've developed, and we have software that we use called Notion that we keep a lot of our data in. So we do an intake with either the production company or the agency that we're working with to gather, all these little tidbits of information that we might need, whether it's, how do we pay people? Is there a card that we can have on file from you guys that we can use on your behalf? All these different things, right? How is insurance being taken care of? And then we have developed a Google Drive, and you can do this in Dropbox, or there's plenty of other ways you can do this. But we've developed a Google Drive folder structure that has, folders deep into it for various things. And every single time we have a new project, we then copy that folder structure and then, rename it as that job. That's part of our system. And then as we're starting to get files, we're starting to get, either it's crew information or logistics information, locations, cast, et cetera. It's all filtering into this organized system. And we rename every single file in a very organized fashion. My production coordinator has been very essential in helping me do this, but there's a specific way that we name it with extensions to it so that it's very quick for us to be able to see. And then we have a process at the tail end of every job because our job starts in pre-production. Obviously, it's running things, making sure that time on set works. And then there's the wrap that happens. We're then taking those files and receipts and all the data that we have and putting it into a new section, what we call wrap. And there's another set of folders in there that then is passed on to that agency, production company, et cetera, our client essentially, that they take and put into their records. All these files that are coming in then are put into our system in a way that's easy, accessible, and it can be grabbed at a moment's notice for whatever we need it for.
Nice,
so I don't know. That's a little tidbit of information. I don't know if that helps anybody.
That's great. That's absolutely great. How do people find you or follow your work?
Yes, you can check out my website. That's now 2 years old and I need to update it. It's bryanfellows.com, Bryan with a Y, if you're wondering. And then for whatever reason, my Instagram is Fellows, that's FELLOWS 031. Don't know what that means. But way back whenever I came up with it, I've stuck with it. So you can check out work there. I'm less active on Instagram these days because I am trying to be more present, but I do every project try to at least post about the project or what have you in my stories, not so much on the feed.
Yeah.
So if you look underneath my name and like a little profile information, I actually have folders of BTS folders on Instagram.
Oh, nice.
And you can go back and you can look at different sets, kind of BTS of those sets that I've been on and see the kind of work that I've been part of.
Very nice. Nice. Bryan, you have given some great insight here with some great tangible resources. We really appreciate it. Like we have a lot to chase down now.
Yeah, no worries. Well, my watch is telling me I need to stand up, so I better do that.
Oh my gosh. We don't need to talk about the back injury that I had the other week. And I guarantee you it is because I do not stand up enough. Like,
I hear
ooh,
you.
like in some ways I want to divulge this just because it's so utterly ridiculous. Okay, all right, really, really quick. I'll just tell you
Yeah.
because it's kind of hilarious and in a horrifying sort of way. But like sitting so much, our job is not wrapped around movement as much these days, unless
Yes.
you're on set. And so
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, I'm gonna stretch out my back, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine, if you will, at the chiropractor, there's this bed that it is a table that will hinge down from your hips. And it's not the ka-chunk table. It is the one that will like just passively stretch your lower back muscles, right?
Sure. Sure.
In any case, I was just like, okay, I'm gonna do that, but on my own, right? And so I have my elbows just on the side of the bed, right? And I'm letting my legs dangle so I can stretch out my lower back. And something spasmed in the way that back spasming has never spasmed before in my
Oh
life.
no.
And
Oh no.
I could not go up, I could not go down, I could not like put my weight on anything else. And then I'm like shaking there. I'm shaking on my elbows because I'm just like, okay, I have to move. This is like 20 minutes of this. It's ridiculous. Okay. And I finally lower myself onto my knees. And when I tell you the red hot pain that was like
Oh no.
radiating through my lower back, it was insane. I finally, like, I'm using my chin on the edge of the bed to lower me down to my elbow. I'm wrapped around the side. My phone is not within reach. I don't have an Apple Watch. I don't have Hey Siri activated. I don't have anything to like contact people. I am like pulling the bedspread down to get my phone. It was the most
Ah,
pathetic sight that you could ever imagine, right? So I'm like getting my phone and I'm just like Reddit, like back spasm, can't move, help. Like I don't know what to do. And then I was just like watching these videos. I'm just like, how do I, what is this, like how do I help this back spasm? Like, well, is it a spasm, is it a slip disc, what is it? And I also just casually kind of texted my roommate and was just like, hey, when are you when are you headed home? And not to alarm you, but I can't get up. I'm on the floor. And oh my gosh, just so I wouldn't traumatize her when she was running through the house. I heard her running through the house and up the stairs. I'm just like, it can be a traumatizing thing seeing your
right.
roommate's legs on the ground, just like, and I'm just like, hey, before she reached the room, I'm just like, hey, what's up? And she's like, oh my gosh, do I call 911? Do I get an ambulance here? I'm like, absolutely not. $7,000 to tell me I have a back spasm? No. So we call our nurse friend and she calls her ortho friend. And it was a 2.5 hour ordeal.
Oh no.
So dumb. What actually fixed it was a ball. It was a racquetball that, just kind of like
Yep.
loosened all that stuff up. But oh my
Yep.
gosh, people, especially if you do not
Exercise.
move, I
Exercise.
do not kid you. Do not skimp on this thing. We talk a lot about balance and boundaries and all of that fun stuff and all the emotional stuff, but physically, it is
Yes.
a thing. Move, go to a
Yes.
trainer, like start exercising so you don't end up on the floor for two and a
No.
half hours. I
You're
don't know what
100% correct. You're 100% correct.
it
I
is
mean,
ridiculous.
I moved a lot more when I was, in other roles, but now
Yeah.
essentially producers is essentially an executive role,
Yeah.
right? We're
Yeah.
sitting at a computer, we're on
Mm-hmm.
Zoom meetings all day, we're on the
Yep.
phone all day, that kind of thing, except for the few days that we're on set. We're not on
Mm-hmm.
set even close to being the number that a crew member would be, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
I never was one to exercise. I was typically a thin guy for many years.
Mm.
But at 36, I will say exercise. It is extremely, extremely important.
Well,
And it
you're
will
an
serve a lot of
asset.
other
That's the
things.
thing. Your
Yeah.
body is an asset and you need
Yeah.
to invest in it. And I actually did start with a trainer, not because
Yeah.
of that, but like way before. Part of me in my in my head was just like, hey, I was working with a trainer. Why did this happen?
I
But
know.
it is a big deal. Invest in your health.
Yes.
We
It's
are
great.
old. We're talking about like
I know.
I'm talking
Back
about
pain. We're talking
back
about back
pain.
pain.
Uh-huh.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I
Or
actually had an incident. I don't know if it was a post COVID thing or what, but I had like super fast, heartbeats were going on. It
Wow.
was like
Like tachycardia?
yeah, I don't know. It was weird. And I had this super anxious feeling. I've never been anxious in my life.
Mm,
I mean, I shouldn't say that. There's a couple very extreme times in my life where stuff is going really wrong, but like really not something that I deal with.
hmm
I've never really dealt with anxiety. And it's funny because I was telling my wife, I'm like, what is this? She's like, well, you're anxious. You're having like issues with anxiety. I'm like, this is what
Anxiety.
this is? I don't even know what
Yeah.
this is.
That's
So
anxiety attack.
it was so bad. It was so
Oh, no.
debilitating to the point I couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
Like there was multiple times where I was literally like just sitting there crying to my wife, like, I don't know what's wrong with me.
Wow.
And I had multiple conversations with friends, and the only thing that was kind of a through line with everybody was exercise. Get
Mm,
out there and exercise because it will help. And I got really serious, and I
interesting.
went out there and I started exercising again,
Yeah.
and it hasn't come back.
Wow.
And slowly, like I'm getting my trends from my Apple Watch and stuff, and
Mm,
the rapid heartbeats as well as just in general the
hmm
level, the RPMs are going down
mm.
just from getting out there and exercising a little bit.
I can let you go, but this has been great. If you enjoyed this interview, follow us right here and on Instagram, ask us questions, and check out more episodes at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. Be well and God bless. We'll see you next time on The Practical Filmmaker.